This was the big screen adaptation of the Irwin Allen TV series Lost in Space, which itself was inspired by the Swiss Family Robinson, which I remember seeing as a kid, the Disney version of that, and a comic book called, what was the comic book called? Space Family Robinson. And a comic book called The Space Family Robinson. So the film, as does the series, focuses on the Robinson family, who undertake a voyage to a new nearby star system to begin a large-scale emigration from a soon-to-be uninhabitable Earth. But they're thrown off course by a saboteur, and they've got to find their way back home. So this came out in 1998, directed by Stephen Hopkins, who had previously given us the second Predator movie, Ghost in the Darkness, and was and is a genre fan. The film received negative reviews, didn't do particularly very well at the box office, broke even from an 80 million budget, but was derided, despite having a great cast. William Hurt as John Robinson, Mimi Rogers as Maureen, Heather Graham as daughter Judy, Lacey Chabray, and Gary Oldman, a perfect fit for the treacherous Dr. Zachary Smith. I can't still... and of course, fresh from Friends, Matt LeBlanc. Yes. Who would have thought Matt LeBlanc as a space hero?
And indeed, he was still in Friends at the time, because they had to juggle the shooting schedule for Friends and this against each other. So he was flying backwards and forwards across the US to basically bounce from one production to the other.
You know what, Andy? I like this film.
Yeah.
I like this film despite a couple of wrong steps, especially in the sort of second half of the film. But I think the majority of this film works really, really well. It captures the essence of the original TV series, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. It feels up to date. It feels like it's doing something a little bit fresh and a little bit new. But it's lost in space. Now, it does get a little bit lost in plot towards the end of the film, and I put that down to expectations of a sequel. And I think Akiva Goldsman just sometimes, and I don't think he's a terrible writer. I know he's done some not great films, but I do think Akiva Goldsman has issues when it comes to knowing how to end a movie. But I think it's got a lot of charm. The effects work's good. It's got some very clever updated takes on the Lost in Space mythos. And I think, and I know Stephen vaguely, I think he did a great job directing this. And he introduced a couple of elements that the Matrix were inspired by, and that's including bullet time, used for the very, very first time ever pre the Matrix.
Yeah. I'm with you that I don't think this is as bad a film as people like to think. I'm not sure if everyone who says that it's a bad film has actually watched it or just took the negative criticism that it got from the critics at the time, because it, like you say, it's fun. It captures the spirit of Lost in Space. It was planned to be at least a trilogy, but sadly we never got to see it continue aside from in comic book format. But even a rewatch this week, yes, there's some flaws in it, and some of the flaws is the dated CGI. The CGI elements of the small little creature that they have, that they found and adopt as a pet. That is
totally
get you or something.
Which was in the original series was basically a chimpanzee.
The blob.
Yeah, with a silly sort of hat on that made it appear to be an alien.
And also that final act as the evolved Dr. Smith as a spider creature is awful. I mean, it's worse CGI than the blood god in Blade. That's how bad it is. But for the majority of this film, I was pumping my fist in the air and just going, this was the fun I remembered from when I first watched it. And I've been a huge fan of the Lost in Space franchise ever since Channel 4 showing reruns. I mean, I think initially ITV used to do them, but then when Channel 4 started and I was entering like me, getting close to my teen years, every Sunday you'd get up to watch either Lost in Space or Land of the Giants, or both if it was a really good Sunday. Irwin Allen classics of serialized stuff. And this is the thing with Lost in Space, is that the show was a success when it came out, but it cost too much, and so it got cancelled through the escalating budgets. But it became more and more beloved for every successive generation, thanks to syndication and reruns. And I absolutely used to love watching all the single episodes of Lost in Space, never really questioning why they'd never got off these planets and why they spent a whole season on each planet. It made sense. I know in the latter season they then started to shift from planet to planet, but it was just the characters. It was the dynamics between them. And so when this film was coming out, I was excited because I saw the cast list and thought, I can see each of those characters in each of those elements of cast. And then we got like Apollo 440's beautiful remastering of the Lost in Space soundtrack, theme tune. And that just got me really, really excited. So when I watched this with my mates on the big screen, we all came out of it loving it, and then saw how everyone had hated it and started wondering what went wrong? Why is no one else seem to be enjoying this? Why are everyone laughing at us when we say that we think this is a good film?
I agree. I have a lot of love for this. I think the fact that they chose Gary Oldman to take over Jonathan Harris's incredibly campy and over-the-top Dr. Smith worked perfectly. I mean, ideal casting on paper. And talking of casting, Matt LeBlanc wasn't the original choice. This is a scoop, because the original choice was, right up to before filming was about to start, was Sean Patrick Flannery. But I think it was the studio that pushed for Matt LeBlanc to try and make him into a big star. I do remember a friend of mine going to a cast dinner while this was being shot in London, and talking to William Hurt, who took it all very, very seriously and wanted to know what button did what on the ship. But I'm with you, Andy. I think it captures the essence of the original series, and the original series is campy fun that, for holding in high regard, does often fall to pieces with, I remember the Attack of the Carrot Vegetable People episode in particular, but it was fun, and I think the film did that. I think the film replicated that element. Now, as we said, in the second half of the film, it does go astray once they land on the planet, but it's not quite enough to spoil it, because, as Lost in Space used to do, it ends on a cliffhanger. And I think if we'd got a Lost in Space 2, I think we could have opened up and found out more about the characters. But I do have some love for this film.
I think one of the things that works for this film is in amongst the spectacle, and when they find the Proteus, the wreck of the Proteus, that is some beautiful spectacle, especially as the spider creatures start attacking them. And the spectacle is visually appealing. But what is important with Lost in Space is the family dynamic. And even that last act, as it starts to fall apart with a time distortion, and Javed Harris pops up as an older Will Robinson. Javed Harris, marvelous bit of casting. They did want to get original Will Robinson actor Bill Mummy along for it, but then decided as it was going into production that would feel like a cheap gimmick, and it might distract from the seriousness that they were trying to approach. But even as the film is falling apart CGI-wise and a bit messy in plot contrivances, it's still all a family story. And particularly, it's a father and son who've never really bonded, and them finding that bond through all the trouble. It's all about the family aspect, including, he's not a part of the family Robinson, but Major Don West, who is assigned to be a pilot and played with absolute fun by Matt LeBlanc, who I never really had time for. I'm not a lover of Friends. I didn't see the point. But when I watched him in this, I was like, he's got some screen charisma. I can go with this. And he's got a decent chemistry, an awkward chemistry with Heather Graham as Dr. Judy Robinson, as he's trying to, he's one of these charmers. He's smooth talker, but she's not convinced by that. And he has to basically become a bit more serious and intelligent before she starts to notice something in him. The whole dynamic of the cast works well. Gary Oldman is chewing every piece of scenery around him and having so much fun with it. And even the robot, who is given the voice by original robot voice actor Dick Tufeld, even that lends some wonderful charm with his bonding to Will Robinson, played by Jack Johnson. I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun watching it when it first came out. Revisiting it, I was unsure when I pressed play whether or not we'd made the wrong choice for a deep dive, because I was like, this might not live up. But by the end of it, I was like, actually, this lives up. And it's important that we deep dive films like this that people have kind of been negative about, because it might convince people out there who've always been put off watching it to go and check it out and see if you can get the fun that we got from it.
No, totally agree. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed going back to it. There are elements in it, but there was some really nice little touches in it. As you say, the spider battle on the Proteus is fantastic. The way that the spacesuit helmets, and again, now it's one of those things that you've seen tons and tons of time, grows out of the back of the suit. It's one of those effects that you're used to seeing, but when I first saw it, it really stood out. I think the film's got energy. I think it has a sense of humor. I think it has its faults, but I do think it's a bit of an, I wouldn't say classic, but it's an underrated, pretty good sci-fi film that you can just sit back and enjoy. This wasn't the first attempt of bringing Lost in Space back to the big screen. Sorry, back to the screen, because there was an animated series after the original series ended.
It was part of the Hanna-Barbera Filmation and Rankin Bass Saturday Superstar movie mornings that ran in 72 to 73 in the US. Airing on September the 8th, 1973, the animated show had Dr. Smith, who was still voiced by Jonathan Harris, being the only character from the original program to appear. But it was an attempt to bring it back.
Then we had The Robinsons, which was an unseen pilot directed by John Woo that tried to do something a little bit different, bring it up to date with an entirely different cast. The only probably recognizable name on it would be Adriana Palicki, who played Judy Robinson, who she went on to be in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., was now a cast member on The Orville. And then in 2018, we got the Netflix remake, which was a lot closer in essence to Lost in Space, with a fantastic cast with Toby Stephens playing John Robinson and Molly Parker as Maureen, that did a kind of a gender swap with the Dr. Smith character by bringing in Parker Posey. And that was pretty good. Big budget series from Netflix, and lasted 3 seasons. And if you haven't watched it, it's still worth checking out. It goes somewhere different than Lost in Space, but it keeps the family dynamic, which is why Lost in Space always works, because you have to remember this is a family, and that's its charm. That's what makes it work.
There's been various comic books through the years. Indeed, the original Lost in Space TV series was inspired by the comic book series Space Family Robinson. In 1991, Bill Mummy himself gave guidance over a Lost in Space revival comic book, which ran for quite a decent run, and is well worth picking up as it explores the life of the family Robinson about 10 years after the events of the series. 1998, there was Dark Horse Comics did ones to tie into the film. And in 2016, there was Irwin Allen's Lost in Space, The Lost Adventures from American Gothic Press. Lost in Space, every incarnation of Lost in Space has always been about the human relationships of a family dynamic put into perilous situations, be it the series, which Yes, it was campy, it was cheesy, but it was family. The film, the comics, the novelizations, whatever. And I think that the 1998 film sits comfortably alongside all the other incarnations for its own little slice of it. It also, interestingly, when I was rewatching it, Penny journals everything that she does through video blogging. Back in 1998, nobody video blogged. Now the whole world do. So this is a film that sits actually quite comfortably in modern era because everyone's TikToking their lives to death or Instagramming their lives to death. This film signposted that. This film predicted that would be what we'd be doing right by this point in our lives. Who'd have thought that a throwaway junk sci-fi movie would have predicted the future so well?
Don't take our word for it. Do take our word for it. Take our word for it. Give Lost in Space another chance. If you've not seen it, I think you might enjoy it if you come into it without any of the baggage. And if the Lost in Space movie isn't for you, track down the original series or watch the Netflix series. It's well worth. It is well worth your time.